Most people would consider vocabulary to be the biggest chore in learning a language. You can learn the grammar, you can learn the rules for conjugating verbs, but the vocabulary itself, actually learning all the essential words, does take time because there are so many thousands of words out there. Of course, if you focus on the most frequent vocabulary and actually try to focus on the essentials as soon as possible, as we're doing, your payoff can be much higher. For example, you only have to learn about 2,000 words in Spanish to understand 90% of everything spoken or written. To get from there to 99%, it would take tens of thousands of more words, so focusing exclusively on those first 2,000 is our priority. Now, along these lines, in this video, we'll be learning just 6 words. But these 6 words, just in and of themselves, will already bring you to 10%. No, we're not learning any nouns, adjectives, or verbs. Instead, we're learning the little connecting words that make up the structure of the sentences. With the rest of the videos in Lesson 1, you'll be at 25%, which is exciting. That means that if you take a page of Spanish text and mark out all the words that you don't know, still 25% of those words would still be showing. We'll get to 10% just with the 6 words in this video. Now, the way that we're going to learn these words is that we're going to use funny stories and memorable images involving Joel and his world. And we'll use these stories as mnemonics to tie each word to its meaning. Here's the amusement park in Joel's neighborhood in Yole. Between each of the rides in the amusement park is a power line. So these power lines are suspended between the rides, and some mischievous kids have thrown shoes over the lines. So the shoes hanging down on the power lines cause the lines to hang down, and they hang down in a sort of Y shape, as you can see. Now, when Joel goes around the park listing off rides, he's afraid of the shoes because bees can be squashed by shoes. So he'll fly around the park listing off rides, but between the rides, he gets scared of the shoes and he yells, "E!" So it might sound like this if he's naming off rides. He might say, roller coaster, E. Carousel, E. Ferris wheel, E. Water slide. So what he's doing is he's putting E between each of the items in the list. And it turns out that he's actually made that a habit now. When he's listing things, he puts E between the items. Now remember that the shoes hanging from the power lines that Joel is so scared of make a sort of Y-like shape. The letter Y in Spanish by itself actually means something. It's the word for and. So the letter Y by itself sounds like E and means and. So if you ever want a conjunction between items that you're listing, just remember Joel flying around the park listing rides and yelling E between them. After a few uses, of course, you'll get used to the fact that Joel says his ands this way. He says E, and you won't have to use this ridiculous imagery anymore. It'll become second nature and a part of your Joel voice very quickly. The next word that we're going to learn is the Spanish word for of or from. It's an example of a word that doesn't have an exact one-to-one translation with any English word, but that's okay because we'll see the way that Joel uses it, and we'll just use it the way that he does. Joel doesn't like the carousel because it doesn't have any interior lights. It's pretty dark in there, and Joel doesn't like being stuck in a dark place with a bunch of representations of horses. Remember that he doesn't like mammals. Whenever he's on the carousel, he wishes he was in the daylight. Whenever he's on the carousel and somebody asks him where he's from, he says, "de," because all he can think about is the daylight outside and the fact that he just came from the daylight. Note that Joel is mostly yellow. He considers himself a part of the daylight, so he says that he is of the day. So every time you think of being of something, or from something, or belonging to something, for example, I am from Oklahoma, you use the word de, because Joel always uses de to indicate something's origin. The literal meaning is of, but he frequently uses it where we would use the word from. Let's see a couple of examples. If Joel was to say, "from here we left," he would say, "de here we left." And this is how he says it.
De aquí nos fuimos.
Remember to avoid thinking about all the other words in the sentence. We're focusing on the tiny connecting words like de, which is the only one in that sentence that you know. Again, from here we left.
De aquí nos fuimos.
As another example, if Joel wants to say that something is true, he doesn't say, is it true? Instead, he asks if it's of truth. So he says,
De verdad.
again, try to ignore that second word and just focus on de. So he asks if something is de truth. You might imagine that he's presented with a story or a fact inside the carousel, but he wants to know if it actually came from truth. So the word de indicates origin. As a final example for de, sometimes Joel uses that word in cases where we wouldn't. For example, if he wants to say they are the same people as always, he instead says they are the same people from always or of always, as if he's saying they're the same people of how they always were or from how they always were.
Son los de siempre.
What he just said was, they are the of always, or they are those of always. That's just how Joel says it. They are those de always. So de is an extremely common word. Okay, next word. After the carousel ride is over, Joel gets stuck on one of the horse's steep backs, so he can't get out. Now look at the horse's back. It's shaped very sharply and forms a sort of letter N, and Joel is wedged into the angle tightly, or on it. So he's in the tight spot, but he's on the horse, and he himself can't decide if he's in a tight spot or on the horse. So of course Joel calls loudly for help, but when somebody shouts back to ask where he is, Joel says that he's en the carousel. So en most literally means at, but it can also mean in or on if that's the normal way to relate to something. En implies that you're at something the normal way. If it's normal to be in a chair, that's en. If it's normal to be on a stage, that's also en. When Joel is at the carousel, it's normal for him to be on a horse's back or in a tight spot. So remember that letter N for the word en, when someone is at, in, or on something. Specific uses are going to be learned through context in sentence examples.
Estoy en tu casa.
This sentence means, I am at your house. It could also be translated, I am in your house. Of course, in this case, it can't be translated, I am on your house, because that would be strange. It's not normal to be on a house. Being in a house is the normal way to be at a house. So if you're at a house, you're en a house.
Estoy en casa.
This one literally means, I am at house, and this is how Joel says, I'm at home. Again, en refers to the normal way that someone is in or on something else. I am at house is a very common Spanish idiom. Another example.
Él y yo estamos en la casa de Juan.
Listening closely to that sentence, you can hear three words that you already know. So you heard y, which means and, you heard en, which means at, and you heard de, which means of. The literal meaning of this sentence is, he and I are in the house of Juan. So just focusing on these conjunctions and prepositions that we already know, he, y, I, are en the house de Juan. Being able to recognize these words in context when a Spanish speaker says them is an essential listening skill. So we'll hear that sentence again.
Él y yo estamos en la casa de Juan.
As a reminder, you want to be imitating the way that Joel says these words whenever you use them yourself. New word. Joel sees that there's a new ride. It's a giant water slide. He wants to check the new ride out, plus he's thirsty and wants some water. So he goes to it saying, ah. in eager anticipation of the joys that this ride might bring. Now, since Joel goes to the slide and says, ah, that will help you to remember that the word for to, as in going to something, is a. This next sentence example will have an instance of a, an instance of de, and an instance of y.
Voy a la casa de Juan y voy a jugar ahí.
Remembering still to ignore the big words between the little connecting words, what he's saying there is, I'm going to the house of Juan, and I'm going to play there.
Voy a la casa de Juan y voy a jugar ahí.
The next word that we learn is one of the most difficult words for English speakers to learn because it has so many applications. But as in all these cases, if you get used to these prepositions now, we can leverage that later because it really pays off in the end to have these down first. The water slide is one of the strangest rides in the amusement park. It's made of stone, and the water is actually produced by the stone itself, which pours out the water from an opening at the top. But the way that the water slide works is that the water doesn't just leave the rock. The slide itself is made of rock, and the water flows down along the rock and around it in circles until it reaches the bottom. The word por literally means by, but if you extend the meaning of the word by to include lots of different meanings, such as along, near, around, or in place of someone else, those are a few of the meanings that this very strange preposition encompasses. Clearly, we can't simply translate this word into English. You really have to understand the nuances of the word, so we'll look at a few examples of how the word is used. Again, much of the time this word means by, as in the water is produced by the rock, or we walked by his house, which is a different meaning of by. But try to get used to these uses and associate each one with how the water relates to the rock on the water slide. First example, the book is por him. The book is by him.
Este libro es por él.
So in that case, por means it's by him, just like the water is produced by the rock. In the next case, por is used to mean by, as in near something.
Tú y yo estamos por la casa.
You and I are near the house. So por means by, as in we're by the house, but in English we'd probably translate that as near, just like the water is near the rock on the water slide. So continue to think of the water slide. The water is being produced by the rock, but it also stays near it or by it. The next sentence is, the day-to-day around here is boring. So you'll hear both a and por.
El día a día por aquí es agujereado.
Yes, I've asked Joel to speak very slowly and clearly today, but still please try to ignore the long words. The long words are not important. What's important is the day a day por here. The day today around here. Remember that por also means along. So in the next case, it's going to be for many years. Joel doesn't say for many years. He says along many years. So he says por many years. I was there por many years.
Estaba ahí por muchos años.
So in this case, it's like the water is going along the stone for many years. It's along the years. Think of the water wrapping around the years. In each case, the word por refers to the stone of the slide. The book is por the author. We are por the house. I was there por many years. The next example is, it was I and a man from around there. So you'll hear y, de, and por.
Era yo y un hombre de por ahí.
It was I, y, a man, de por here. So de por is how Joel says from around or from near. The last word to learn today is the number one most common word in the Spanish language. When Joel is between rides trying to make a decision about something, he is in the habit of saying que, as in okay. So often, when he's trying to decide whether to ride the carousel or the Ferris wheel, he looks at both of them and he says, I've decided que we're going to ride the Ferris wheel. Now, the reason that he decides on the Ferris wheel is because of this que habit. The Ferris wheel has a structure inside it that kind of holds it together and looks like a giant letter K. But the important thing to remember is that Joel uses que all the time when he's making decisions or just connecting sentences with separate phrases. In saying, I've decided que we're going to ride the Ferris wheel, que equates to the English word that as a conjunction. And this is the common direct translation of que.
No ahora que estás aquí.
That sentence literally means, not now that you are here. Not now que you are here. With the next sentence, don't be thrown off by the fact that there is a word that sounds like que at the beginning of the sentence, because that first word, que, is actually a different word, and it's sort of spelled differently.
Qué bueno que seas tú.
Literally, what good that you are you, or how nice that it's you. What's important here is the que in the middle of the sentence. How nice que it's you. Note that this word que, meaning that, is a connector, not a noun. There's actually a different word for the English word that as a noun, as in that over there. But still, this word que is used all the time because it's used to connect all sorts of different things. For example, although that is the most common translation, as in I hope that you are nice, and I told you that we are at home, it can also be used as than in comparisons. As a sentence example, the Ferris wheel is taller que the carousel. Joel compares the two, and he sees the big tall que in the Ferris wheel, and decides that the Ferris wheel is taller que the carousel. Now here's a real example in Joel's voice.
Estoy mejor que nunca.
Literally, I am better than never, or I am better than ever. Remember that Joel tends to be a little redundant, even to the point of illogic, so that was literally, I am better than never. But what's important here is the word que as a comparative word. I am better que never. Now, as with many, many words, the exact idiomatic use of this word will have to come through practice, listening, and imitation experience. But in general, with the word que, if you use it a whole lot, you'll sound more like a native speaker. So when in doubt, just use the word que when you're connecting phrases. All right, that's 6 words that together comprise more than 12% of the Spanish language. Now, if you're scratching your head at this point and wondering why we've placed all these stories about conjunctions and prepositions in an amusement park, test this out for yourself. If you have to use a word that means you're at something, just think of Joel sitting on the carousel and you can remember en. To describe where you or something else is from or what it belongs to, remember the word de, as in Joel is de the daylight. If you're going to something, think as Joel goes to the water slide. And if something is by, near, against, or along something, you can think of the water pouring down the water slide. And then as far as conjunctions go, if you have to list more than one item, you can remember the between items in the amusement park, And then if you're ever connecting whole phrases or comparing things and need a word for that or than, you just use the word que, which comes from the Ferris wheel.